Scanning for audio.
This version of the podcast is mixed in mono, but if you would like to listen in 5.1 surround sound, please visit ufocast.co.uk/prisoner for more details.
This is episode 2, but we recorded it 4th, back in January 2022.
Hello and welcome to this Prisoner podcast by hook or by crook. I'm Luke, as ever, and my co-host is...
Michael from the Tin Dog podcast, as always.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, Luke.
And as ever, we have a guest with us. The first guest this series, who has his own Wikipedia page. Mark Goodacre, New Testament scholar and professor at Duke University's Department of Religion. Is that correct, Mark?
It is, yeah. It's called Religious Studies now, but yeah, that's roughly correct, yeah.
This says he has written extensively on the synoptic problem, that is, the origins of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke. He has defended the Farah hypothesis and thus accepts Mark and priority, but rejects Q. Before we get into the prisoner stuff, what is all that about, Mark?
Can I just say, I've got A-level or religious studies myself, and I know exactly what that is.
Yay! I didn't know that. That's great.
I certainly do.
I've listened to your podcast over the years, Mark, so I think I have a handle on what it is. But for our listeners who are unfamiliar with you and your work, what is that all about?
Well, it does sound very science fiction-y talking about getting rid of Q, doesn't it? But Q in this context is the supposed early document that has sayings of Jesus in it, and I think it never existed. I think that Luke had a copy of Matthew's Gospel, so that's where we're coming from. And I realise we're in this podcast, we've got a Luke and a Mark, so it does get a little bit confusing on those along those lines as well.
I hadn't even thought about that. So that's your day job. We're kind of delving into the New Testament history and origins and teaching students. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the fact that you are a fan of The Prisoner. So tell us, when did you first encounter The Prisoner and what was it about it that grabbed you?
Sure, yeah, absolutely huge fan of The Prisoner. I used to visit Portmeirion in my childhood. My parents used to take us there. But I actually didn't get to watch The Prisoner complete until 1984 when it was repeated on Channel 4. And so I was incredibly excited to watch it on the new Channel 4 at the time and instantly fell in love with it and been in love with it ever since. And I used to, sadly, when family obligations come in, it's harder to do this, but I used to go to prisoner conventions regularly as well back in the 80s and take part in reenactments of bits of Free for All and Checkmate and so on. So and I think it's one of those things. What is it now? 2022, and I just think it doesn't lose its appeal. It just the rewatch value of most of the episodes. They're not, as we know, they're not all even, but the rewatch value is just outstanding. You see something fresh every single time, I think.
So how many times would you say that you've rewatched the whole series?
I really don't know because I do a regular watch all the way through. The last time I did a complete watch through was the 50th, so that would have been 3 or 4 years ago. So, but every now and then you just really feel like watching a couple of episodes. And I've watched ahead of this one. I rewatched Chimes of Big Ben and enormously enjoyed that again. Watching it with this in view. So I don't know. It would be at 30, 40 times, 50, okay. I don't know. Arrival many, many, many times because that's the one you always want to show to your friends that haven't seen it before.
Mm-hmm. And are you on Blu-ray now? Have you upgraded?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Although the best Blu-ray collection, it seems to me, is the 50th anniversary one, and I've got it on the Region B, and right. when I got a hold of that, I realised I couldn't watch the blasted thing on my American machine. So actually, this is a true story. I actually purchased. Well, I asked my wife if I could have a multi-regional Blu-ray player for my birthday, and she, being a wonderful person, bought it for me. So I actually got my current Blu-ray player in order to watch The Prisoner.
Nice.
Okay, so this is the level of dedication that we're talking about this week. One thing that we're asking every guest that we have on, you talked about it being fresh today, 55 years on. There's lots of interpretations of The Prisoner, from the sort of straightforward surface level of kind of taking it on face value to the various kind of deeper levels of meaning. Michael has been reading the what's the guy's name? Michael?
Well, Alex Cox, the guy who directed Repo Man.
So he's written a book about it,
and Sid and Nancy, yeah.
And you're kind of quite into his theories. J. Michael Straczynski recently on Twitter kind of came up with his theory, which he says is corroborated by Alexis Canner, as to what's going on. So what does The Prisoner mean to you? What do you think it's all about? Without being too spoilery at this point, because people who are new to The Prisoner are only a couple of episodes into our podcast. So what does it mean to you?
It's a difficult one. I mean, I think a large part of it is that I love the surreal aspects of it. And it's kind of surrealism in TV before it became hackneyed and dull. So I like the fact that 1 minute you're watching... I mean, in today's episode, for example, Chimes of Big Ben, you have Christopher Benjamin appearing as one of the chiefs of the village. And then later on, I hope this isn't too spoiled, later on he comes back and the girl who was death as Potter, who is in Danger Man, or the name of the newspaper changes from the Tally Ho to what's it called in It's Your Funeral. It changes its name, and you know, and things that are present 1 minute suddenly aren't present the next minute. Some of them intentional, some of them just accidents of filming, and I just find that makes me want to. I find myself staring at it more than I do with almost anything else. I'm obsessed with how they set up the prisoner, the inside of his house in the village, and like pause and looking at how could they possibly have done it. And then so when you get to Many Happy Returns and Do Not Forsake Me, sorry, is that a spoiler as well?
No, you can talk in generalities.
Okay.
It's nearly 60 years old. I think we're all right.
If you get too spoilery, we might kind of snip it and stick it at the end and say spoilers from Mark. But I think generally you can talk about future episodes. In general.
So when you get to those episodes and you actually see you're back in Buckingham Place again. I find that terribly exciting. Just kind of visually working out what's going on, and I think more than anything else, I mean, people talk a lot about the meaning of The Prisoner and all the rest of it, but I think fundamentally it's the look of The Prisoner that's so fantastic. I mean, it's filmed, like starting filming in September 1966, and it still looks absolutely gorgeous. The colours are absolutely fantastic, and I'm always really struck thinking about my dad. Told me about his first viewing of The Prisoner in the 1960s. And, of course, he was watching it on black and white, like more or less everybody was at the time. And you think, God, to think the people that were seeing the series for the first time weren't even experiencing it in colour. I find that, given how beautiful the colours are. So it's, I think, for me, more than anything else, it's the look of the series. And that partly comes also from a love of Portmeirion. I adore Portmeirion. I can't visit it often enough, so there's that as well. And Clough Williams-Ellis said that he didn't think Portmeirion had ever looked more beautiful than it looks in The Prisoner. So I think, that is something that it really, really stands out.
Yeah, it's definitely a vote of confidence on that one.
Yes. So, I mean, let's move into talking about the episode. One of the things that struck me when I first watched this episode on Blu-ray and then watching it again this time is that very little of Chimes of Big Ben is shot in Portmeirion. Most of it is recreations of Portmeirion in the studio on the backlot with backdrops. And I think watching that on lower resolution VHS and DVD is probably something I didn't notice at the time. Not that it spoils the episode, but it's just one of those kind of things about the filmmaking process that you kind of think, oh, Prisoner, Portmeirion, but actually,
apparently
so
the Portmeirion
bit
at the end of this is bits of the Dirty Dozen set redressed.
Is that right?
The bit where he walks out after he's discovered he's not in.
It's like, you're not in London anymore. No, you're on the set of the Dirty Dozen. What? Eh?
Well, that's set as well at which is also where they do the kind of the town hall for the for the for the competition.
Yeah.
I mean, there's bits of that you can see very clearly in Living in Harmony as well. And A, B, and C. I mean, you can actually, once you've watched The Prisoner often enough, well, not just that, but other 1960s shows, you can see that sort of those Boreham Wood bits being reused. I love that about it. And I love the fact, although us nerds, we can spot and go, oh yes, now we're at Elstree, or now we're back in Portmeirion. But I mean, actually though, if you didn't have that knowledge, you would just assume that this whole thing was just filmed in, the same. I was astonished when I found out how much wasn't filmed in Portmeirion.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid watching this for the first time, it was all seamless, and I had no idea that it wasn't all shot on location. So I don't say that to detract from the episode. I just think it's a marvel of the filmmaking. So why this episode, Mark? Of all the episodes that you could have chosen that were available to you when you were picking to come on, why the Chimes of Big Ben?
Couple of reasons. First one is that I have a vague memory of being 10 years old and my parents dragging me out of bed to watch it, because we'd been to Portmeirion for the first time in 1975. And I know that Prisoner was rerun late at night on ITV in 77. And I have a memory of my parents going, look. And me sort of seeing, because when I finally watched Chimes of Big Ben in 84, I had a massive deja vu when you get the grand denouement, which I adore, where he opens the cupboard and there's the tape recorder. Fantastic. So that's part of it. It's sort of my earliest memory of The Prisoner, that moment. Second reason is, I was very lucky in 1986 when I was at the Prisoner convention, the 6 of 1 convention in Portmeirion, that the alternative version of Chimes of Big Ben had been brought over by Bruce Clark, who was the American coordinator of 6 of 1 at the time. And I was staying with my brother, Jonathan, in the Chantry, because basically it was a cheap way of being able to be there. And there were a bunch of other people there, including Bruce Clark. And he actually literally had the reel in his hands. And a guy called Larry Hall, who was one of the coordinators at the time, he got an old projector, brought it into the Chantry, and they put the thing on in the room and projected it against the wall. And so I'm seeing this amazing alternative version with the original titles, Wilfred Joseph's titles and everything, and seeing this, like, the new scene which we'd not seen before with the triquetrum and all this. And that was just so. It was one of those heart-poundingly exciting things. So I can't now watch Chimes of Big Ben without also thinking about that experience. So I think, but also aside from all of those, I adore this episode. I think it's a fabulous episode, and if I just one reason for that is I adore Leo McKern. I think he is he is such a fabulous number 2. I mean, and his relationship with number 6 in this episode, just gorgeous.
No, McKern's brilliant in this. You can see why Pat went, you're the number 2 we'll keep coming back to.
Yeah.
It just works. He's such an opposite of number 6 in his performance, but McKern just holds his own in everything he's ever done. So yeah, it's not just. I mean, everyone sort of my generation just goes, "Oh yeah, he's Rumpole of the Bailey," but you see him appear time and time again everywhere else, and he's always good. He's never less than brilliant. And when you think of him, your brain. I know it's not just because we're Prisoner fans. But our brain just goes, oh yeah, numbers. You see him in the scarf, standing there, or in the room or whatever, and he just is number 2. He's always that, and I suppose it's because he has such a major important effect at the end of this season, and either at the end of season 1 and the end of season 2, if you look at it that way, or at the end of the whole run, if you look at it the other way. But either way, he's so important. But those only exist because of this story, and he does really go for it, because he says a lot of political stuff that isn't really gone into later on in the other stories. It's like he's the counterpoint to number 6, so he can make the same points Pat's making, saying, does it really matter who owns the village, what side it is, because everybody's the same. My worldview is that one day the world will be one big village. And none of the other number twos really say what the village is for. They're just kind of a lot more focused on their job at hand, breaking him and that, rather than having that considerably more sinister worldview of, well, yeah, of course we're all going to be observed and constantly watched. It'll be good for everyone. And it doesn't matter who's in charge because everyone's the same. It's the powerful and the powerless. And that's how it'll always be. And it doesn't matter what colour your flags are, it'll all look like the village. And that's what McKern manages to sell all quite well.
Yeah. And he doesn't seem to be bothered that he fails.
No, and that is odd.
You know, like other number twos probably get slightly more frustrated that they don't manage to break him, whereas he just doesn't seem to be bothered. He's like, okay, well, we tried that and it didn't work.
Yeah. The Alex Cox reading of the whole thing does imply that, apart from the fact that number 6 may actually have created the village in the first place, and he's gone in order to test it out, and then had his mind wiped so he can be like the ultimate literally prisoner in order to test its for purpose. It does imply that he's almost friends with McKern outside of this, but he doesn't know he is. So failing is like, yeah, you've won this time, but we'll get it.
There's also that aspect of like how many people are in on this conspiracy, because every time you meet some people from his past life, so obviously slight spoilers, but obviously you mentioned Many Happy Returns. There's Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. Every time he kind of gets back into the real world, or in this case, thinks he's got back into the real world, he meets some more people who were part of his organisation who are then in on the village, you know? And it's almost like, who's not in on the village, you know? At the end of the day.
Which does leave credence to the whole, it's definitely organised by the British anyway. But that's not implied by some of the things that get said. It's just... Everything contradicts everything. There is no one fixed thing that just works. But that's only if you try and stare at it too much. If you just see it for what it is like allegory and story coming at you, then that works.
But I think also, though, this is why this works well as an early episode, because number 6 is really trusting in this episode of Nadia. I mean... Yeah, and he should have known better after arrival, but he still doesn't. He still goes for it with Nadia. I mean, you know, and I mean, there's this complicated setup, you know, where as we later find out, Nadia is basically acting as well. But I think then having these British guys, the General and Fotheringay, being terribly, terribly British, actually works in this context, because your instinct on first viewing is, well, yeah, he's gone back home. You have to believe that. You've got to believe he's there, because if you don't, the whole thing's gone.
Because he gets phoned when only us, the viewer, is watching Fotheringay, and Fotheringay was like, he's on his way up. All right, then, thank you. And there's no reason, if it's a con, for that to happen,
right.
except to tell us, the audience, that this is real.
Yes.
Yeah.
But are they just so entrenched in character to go, and now we're beginning the scene, and he's on his way up? So
I like to think it is that it's definitely that they're so good. They're doing proper method acting, and they've got into character.
I get all that, but they arrive on that. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I was going to say, this is the episode. They get delivered in the box, which is just odd. But they're in the room, which is the recreation, and I get that. Obviously, there's the technicalities of how they get back. There's the 10-hour. There's the flight. There's being nailed in the box. Yeah. There's all of that business, and you do see an aeroplane take off, which is a weird British BOAC, I think it is. But you see it take off and land. So obviously, it's not like Mission Impossible, where they have someone holed up in a big warehouse on a mock-up ship and pretending. But that's the closest that this is, because they're tricking him into thinking that. But they actually do go on a boat, and they do go on an aeroplane. Yeah. Or do they? Yeah, they do. So it's the opposite of Mission Impossible, where they're not fooling someone. They're actually doing the reality thing. So they fly him, so it's 8 hours, so they fly him all the way out from wherever the village is, and they fly him all the way back again, and there's a boat involved. And then he ends up back in the village.
Yeah.
but the sound effects must have been playing. It's even more complicated than an episode of Mission Impossible.
And then there's the
if
whole
you think
thing
about
with
the
There's
logistics.
the whole thing with the watch as well,
Yes.
which is what gives the game away.
Right. He do right, for a start.
I mean, for a start, Poland is 2 hours ahead, not 1 hour ahead.
It's not just that, right? Okay, there's that. But more importantly, right, if the village isn't in Poland, that messes that up. Also, which it isn't, you've also got, he takes some guy's watch. What? What's that all that about? And he doesn't know how long he's been away. What about British summertime and Greenwich Mean Time? Like, oh, it's an hour out. Yes, it is. The clocks went back last week. Okay, then. Yeah. It's like, because you've been away for X number of months, but you don't know how long you've been away. For me, sorry, going back a bit, I don't think this works as an episode 2 because it's so similar in respects to episode 1 of he's introduced to the village and they're trying to... He feels like he's been at the village much longer than just one episode because he's so entrenched in dealing with number 2 and he's very congealed. I would have had this a few episodes in, 3 or 4, if it was me doing a run.
I think that's... I know what you meant. I was thinking when I was rewatching this earlier that I think it would have worked well as a later episode. It kind of makes sense that he's beginning to get wise to things. But the reason why I think it's a fantastic second episode is that it basically recaps what's happened in Arrival without recapping it. So you actually watch the Nadia character, the number 8, going through all the same stuff that he went through, watching it with number 2. So let's say, ton of people, they hadn't seen Arrival. You've given the premise again in the first 10, 15 minutes of the thing. And I know you're given the premise in the opening credits of every single episode, but it's not explicitly said at any point in Arrival, is it, that this is the same as the inside of his house, which just visually we see it. But it's explicitly said by number 2 in this that, number 8's house is exactly the same as the inside. So that, to me, it works as a second episode because it's re-grounding anybody that watched Arrival, and for newcomers, you can follow what's going on straight off the bat, I think.
Okay, yes, I can see the argument.
But I think that the whole kind of inconsistencies in the order are also part of the surreal nature of the show. They are. Because as we said, they explicitly say in this episode, he's been there for months, right? Mm-hmm. So he's not been there for a year yet, but he's been there for months. And so you kind of think there's definitely room in there for some of the other episodes to have happened in that time.
Yes.
I mean, I think Free for All in particular, they explicitly say you're new here.
Yeah, that's right.
So it makes sense for Free for All. Anyway.
Well, and Dance of the Dead. He's clearly new in Dance of the Dead as well, which makes it seem very weird when you watch it. I've got more problems with the late positioning of that, actually.
Yeah. So I think any way you slice it, you can't properly make it all mesh up, and you just have to go with the flow.
But just one other thing about I know this is proper nerd territory, like order of episodes.
Welcome.
But I love this
That's
thing.
where we live.
So one of the things I love is, if you have this as episode 2, you've got a very lovely parallel with Once Upon a Time at 16, and I'm afraid that I just love that parallelism. You've got the second number, well, the third number 2 you see, but second episode you see, and then it's back again in Once Upon a Time. That's gorgeous to me. I love that symmetry.
Does that? I was going to say, does that come from your studies of the New Testament?
Yeah, I think so. I think I like that kind of inclusio. Yeah, I love it.
I mean, talking of that, do you see anything of McGowan's own religion in The Prisoner?
I did write a question. Yeah, I did write a really pretentious article when I was a teenager about religion in The Prisoner, which I'd be too embarrassed to.
This is a safe space.
And I did talk a lot about a lot of the imagery in The Prisoner is, of course, derived from Christianity, perhaps most clearly in Fallout. But I mean, you've got it here. When The Prisoner is showing everybody his ridiculous construction at the art show. And you get the line, why the cross piece? And the original script, Tilsley's original script, has got a whole paragraph of stuff like talking about Christianity, and you end up with why not, which is actually a much, much better line. And I think actually the Prisoner works better if one doesn't try and superimpose religious stuff on the top of it. I think you've got the imagery there. You obviously in Fallout you've got dry bones and so on. But I think it's more. I would want to say ethics and morals, but not so much blatant Christian or other religious thinking in there. I mean, and of course, McGowan is inspired by his own Catholicism and so on. But I think he actually deliberately resists going too religious in this, and I think that was the right move.
And what do we think of the way he relates to Nadia? I mean, I'm thinking in particular of the conversation they have inside the box where she says, "Are you married, or do you have a wife back in England?"
And he looks bored.
And or do you have a fiance? And he sort of dodges the question. There is a certain way that the prisoner largely avoids romance in the show. But what do we think about how it appears in this episode?
I personally hate the scene where it's the nighttime scene with the music playing, and he's kind of sort of caressing her head, and it's the one bit in the episode that makes me squirm, because McGowan just doesn't do. It's very similar scene in Dance of the Dead where he's supposed to be dancing, and in a at least something that would be like kind of pseudo romantic, and he just isn't, and he looks awkward with his arms folded. Occasions I wish he would just I wish McGowan had just done a little bit more on that side of things, but because as a result you don't find it remotely plausible that he thinks that Nadia is this kind of naive woman, all the rest of it, and in the sense that you'd have thought the character would really want to make her think that he loves her or whatever.
Yeah.
So that I think that's the one bit that for me is a bit awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that scene is slightly weirdly. I mean, actually, there's some really weird cuts in this episode. I think I'm noticing the editing more, but there's some really weird edits in that scene. There's several angles going on of how they've shot it, and it builds up very, very weirdly.
That's actually as well, that scene where they have that conversation is just, if I remember rightly, it's just after the scene they cut from the alternative version where he's got the triquetrum inside, and he's got a pencil that you've seen him writing in his book, and it's good that they cut that scene because basically he's worked out where the village is on his own, and that kind of not only spoils this episode, but it would spoil many Happy Returns and Fallout as well. So it's a good thing they did cut it, but I think that adds a little bit to the oddness of the cutting, but of the scene,
yeah.
Go on, Michael. No. Well, all I was going to say, one of the things I think we do need to cover is the art competition, and the fact, well, not just the cross, why not just that, but apparently all of the art that's edited in the competition that's got number 2 as its focus, which I think is brilliant, was all done by one person, because I always assumed it was all done by the different parts of the crew, some kids, whatever, and they just brought them all in.
Yeah.
But according to Alex Cox's research, like everything was done by the one art designer, which is just
that's a lot of work.
That's a hell of a one night. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but the thing that does need to be mentioned is the fact that he manages to build a boat bigger than a tree out of a piece of tree by hollowing out a tree. Which I think that's not quite how wood works. Also, he's making it out of a tree he's just felled, and it's not it doesn't dry out. I know I'm just being pedantic.
I love that he chops the tree down, and then the tree falls down in a piece of stock footage, and then it's back to the tree with him. I mean, I'm willing to forgive that scene pretty much anything, because it features, not that I have a ranking, but if I had a top 5, it's probably one of my top 5 pieces of prisoner music. Is the piece called "The Prisoner Chops Down the Tree"? Oh no, number 6 chops down the tree. I think it is on the soundtrack album. That dum 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 dum.
Yes, and is it? So,
and I just love that piece of music.
Yeah, I was wanted to ask you two about this. Do you because it reminds me, always has done, of the 1960s Robinson Crusoe, which had music exactly like that, dung 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 kind of thing. And it occurs to me he's doing the Robinson Crusoe type thing of chopping stuff down and building things. And I'm just wondering if it was.
No, that would make complete sense. Yeah, it's like it's an audio echo of something. Like just or just even a quick reference. So you would just go, "Oh yeah, it's a bit like that." So you've got to refrain from some. Yeah, that makes sense.
I love the mishmash. And we talked a bit about it in our opening chat, Michael and I. But just the music of The Prisoner, you referred to Wilfred Joseph's, who was the second person to have a go at the theme.
Yeah.
And obviously his theme isn't used, but there's bits of his music in this episode. You've then got Ron Grainer gets to do his theme, and then you have Albert Elms comes on to be the composer for the whole series. But also, you then have all these library tracks. So the chopping down the tree one is just one of these library tracks that they picked out of Warner Chappell's library to kind of score it. And I love all those different bits and bobs, and how I think it's Eric Mivell, or Mival, I don't know how you pronounce his name, who kind of brings it all together.
No, I so agree with that. And the thing is, I actually really love that Wilfred Joseph's music. I mean, you can. I mean, obviously, we all absolutely adore the Ron Grainer theme, but when you watch the alternative version with the Wilfred Joseph's theme at the beginning, you actually can hear that theme much more than in the incidental music later on. You become much more aware of how different Joseph's stuff is from Albert Elm's stuff. But somehow they cohere. They're totally different styles, but somehow they really work. And it's I mean, I suppose with any incidental music in anything, if you are noticing it too much, then something's gone wrong. But it is kind of seamless. I think that's right, in spite of the fact they're such different styles.
You can't not notice the music though, because this, and I know it's because it's descended from Danger Man in its family tree at least. You've got a lot. The visual stuff's happening, and there's not as much audio. There's not as much chat as you would get in a different program. So you are aware of the music because there's nothing else there audibly, because you're watching the program happen. There's huge sections where he's making the art, and that just happens, and that works. So yeah, you're aware of the music as the character, but obviously with having the different juxtapositions of the styles of music, that helps with the juxtaposition of the imagery you've got with the old and new, actually in the village or in the prisoner throughout. So that's probably why it works, because you've got so much that doesn't fit. So stuff that doesn't fit fits. Wow.
Well, and it does. I mean, it does reflect something that is extremely odd about the whole setup of the prisoner, which is obviously Portmeirion and so on. It looks kind of amazing and light-hearted, and and Portmeirion is like, Clough and Mazelli said it was like a kind of Gilbert and Sullivan kind of opera. It's supposed to be fun, So you've got that fun coming out in things like Pop Goes the Weasel and all the rest of it, but then at the same time, it's dark and it's tense, and it's playing with your mind, and that's where some of that screechy Wilfred Joseph type music comes in. So I suppose the incidental music as well, especially in this episode where you've got a lot more of the Wilfred Josephs than you get later on. I think it does actually speak to something about what we're actually seeing, which is, a facade of isn't everything wonderful, but actually the underlying, this is a nightmare that we're looking at.
Yeah, I suppose the heart of that nightmare is the scene where they play act torturing her with the whole "can you get to the door" thing, which obviously when you watch it for the first time and you don't know that she's in on the whole thing is quite horrible, really. And you see it a bit in Arrival, where they're kind of showing him around all the different things and they're seeing all these different people and all their therapies that they're getting.
But that is the moment where Number 6 agrees to not collaborate, but try and fit in more.
Yes, exactly. And it's that kind of thing, this sort of humanity of him. He's like, I don't want to see her suffer, and I'm willing to give you something. And obviously he then kind of reels it back and he goes, I'll try and do you a bit of art, and it's kind of driving his bargain. But it is the fact that on one level he's quite a sort of an aloof character, but actually moments like that make you realise that actually he does care about people. He does care about what's happening to the prisoners, although he's obviously constantly trying to work out. You have the scene with the general that he plays chess against, so they're like, well, which army, all that kind of stuff. Like he's constantly trying to work out who's a prisoner and who's not a prisoner, and whose motives or whatever. But for those who he cares about, he is willing to kind of make those sacrifices.
Along the same line, I love the prisoner's humour in this episode. And of course, it's explicit because Leo McKern's number 2 actually has to add it to his file, the sense of humour. But a lot of lines are genuinely funny. I think the building I'll build you a handle for this door is a great line because it's and the thing is, he is a funny character when he wants to be. Hammer into Anvil, one of my favourite episodes. It is a laugh out loud funny episode. To do Patacake Baker's man as the message. It's really so. Occasionally, you break through the anger and the stress, and you see he is a genuinely funny, warm-hearted man. But in general, in The Prisoner, they're pretty good at keeping that on the down low. Because if it was too much of that, you would say, "Well, hold on a minute. He's supposed to be, suffering through all this, anxiety and everything."
Yeah, and I think going back to what we were saying about Leo McKern, a lot of that is the performance bouncing off each other. That actually, yes, I think you were right. It's there in the script, but I suspect that there's an element of McGowan's performance, the sort of lighter side of McGowan's performance, that comes off the fact that he's playing off McKern, who, like I said earlier, seems to not be that bothered. He doesn't seem to be taking it all that seriously, whilst obviously underneath there is a sort of steel to McKern's number 2. That he is kind of taking it seriously, but it does allow him. And I love the bit where he puts the speaker in the fridge.
Yes,
and then obviously the bit where he later brings it outside to kind of use it to mask their conversation. He's like, I hate this. I hate the fact that there's this speaker in my house that's kind of giving me all these messages, but I'm going to use it against you, or I'm going to hide it, and it shows that kind of that humorous kind of fighting back against the system that he's doing.
Very much so.
At this point, our conversation turned towards the location of the village, and we ended up discussing future episodes that bear upon that question as well. So for the sake of people who are new to The Prisoner as they listen along with this podcast, we've moved that to a spoiler section at the end of the show. Anyway, back to our conversation.
I would like to point my learned colleagues towards the Big Finish version of The Prisoner at this point.
Which I still haven't listened to. Have you listened to it,
I'm
Mark?
sure you will.
I have. There's in fact, the chimes of Big Ben in Big Finish Prisoner is really good. Is it called Chimes of Big Ben? But they, without again too many spoilers, they actually do counter some of the problems with this, and also, so one of the things that has always bothered me about Chimes of Big Ben is he goes through all the really dramatic stuff of pulling the wires out to stop the traffic going. Why didn't he open the blinds? Why didn't he open the blinds to the window? Right? And Big Finish actually addresses that, the Big Finish Chimes episode. So that, it's the kind of thing where, the joy of The Prisoner it's got so much rewatch value. But of course, the danger about rewatch is that silly things start bothering you. Like, why?
I've just looked it up. It is called The Chimes of Big Ben.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, it is it's in the first volume, isn't it? And I think it's a relatively early episode. One of the best. It's really, really strong. If people haven't listened to the Big Finish Prisoners, I echo Michael and strongly recommend them.
I finally have to get around to it. I also like the parallel for anybody who was watching The Prisoner and Captain Scarlet, which were kind of contemporaneous, is that they both have a Big Ben related episode.
Do they?
So Captain Scarlet has Big Ben Strikes Again. I want to say Big Ben Strikes Back, but that's not. That's Star Wars. Big Ben Strikes Again. So Big Ben Strikes Again relies on the fact that the Mysterons have taken over an atomic device in a truck. And they've parked the truck somewhere that is a specific distance. It turns out, this is how they work out where it is. It's a specific distance away from Big Ben, such that the guy is listening to the chimes of Big Ben on his radio, and he hears 12 chimes on his radio, and then he hears a 13th chime live from Big Ben. And they're able to work out that because of the speed of sound and stuff, that he's a specific distance away from He's a specific distance away from Big Ben.
Ooh.
And obviously that came out pretty much a similar time to this. So you wait however long for 2 episodes of your favourite show about Big Ben, and you get 2.
Hang on.
Brilliant.
I've heard a story, and I don't know if this is true. Have either of you heard this story before? It's Big Ben related, but I'll tell it as quick as I can. Basically, there was a guy done for murder, and his defence was he wasn't there. Now, this is like hundreds of years ago, or in the last 200 years, whenever it was.
Yeah.
But his defence was he wasn't there because he'd heard Big Ben strike 13 times in the middle of the night.
Right.
And everyone was like, that's ridiculous. But he stuck by it. And then the guy in the watchtower went, yeah, actually, we were messing about. It did strike 13 times. Oh. He definitely wasn't there. And he got off. But I don't know if that's a true story or just something that was in one of those, Eagle annuals from 1974 that you get at the car boot sale.
That's great.
So
no,
I was just wondering if anybody else had ever heard it or if I just imagined it.
I've not heard that. I've not heard that story at all.
No, that's brilliant. I love
in that case, what I'll do is I'll shut up and we'll move on.
No. I mean, I like it. I mean, feel free. I mean, we're either perpetuating an apocryphal story or there's a bit of history that we've just learnt. Feel free to Google, listeners. I guess we're kind of coming into land. So before we do spot the Doctor Who actor, which I have primed Mark to look out for these. Is there anything else we want to say about the episode before we wrap up?
One lovely thing I like about it is, and which is also a sad thing about it, is I love Richard Wattis in this, playing Fotheringay, and I desperately want more of him. I mean, we've got like a couple of scenes, and I think part of it is I grew up in the 1970s watching Sykes, which he was a major actor on, and so it was when I first watched The Prisoner and saw Richard Wattis in it. I don't know this. What a shame not to have a bit more of him. Likewise, is he called Finlay Curry, the general with the moustache? Also, I mean, he's one of those great British character actors. I would love to have more of him, but maybe that's a mark of the success of the cast of The Prisoner, that people appear for just 5 or 10 minutes at the end of an episode and just hit it out of the park.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I recognise Richard Wattis from The Man in the White Suit.
Oh, nice.
Which I've recently picked up on Blu-ray, but haven't rewatched.
The Alec Guinness film.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's one of the various characters in that. Sadly, not an appearance in Doctor Who. Spot the Doctor Who actor. Shall we?
Is that right?
Have...
Is he not? Yeah.
No.
I was wondering if Wattis might be one that I've forgotten.
He didn't do Doctor Who. So, Michael, have you got anything else to say before we dive in?
No, I've only got the one. Well, the only thing in my notes that we haven't covered is that the guy manages to shoot Rover and burst the bubble. Which, I don't know, that sounds... I mean, obviously it's a con, and Rover is bulletproof. But it was just... is that how you kill Bro? Can you stop Rover with a pin? That's rubbish. Right.
Yeah. I mean, in the Simpsons episode, you can stop Rover with a pin, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing in my notes. So I've got one Doctor Who actor, and then that's it.
Okay, well, we'll go to you first, Michael, given that you don't often spot these. So who did you spot?
Well, Kevin's story, because that's quite obvious. I mean, let's face it, that's the equivalent of going, was Tom Baker in this story? Because Kevin's story is like, I mean, he's got, 2 major performances in Doctor Who, and you go, and he just owns every scene he's ever in everything. And there he is there. You just want him to say Packer. It's just great. That's what you want.
I'm going into bat for Revenge of the Cybermen and saying he has 3 major Doctor Who performances.
Yeah, you do know 3.
No, but if you don't know it's him under all the makeup, then yes, you don't know it's him under all the makeup. I'm guessing, Mark, you spotted him too.
No.
You didn't spot Kevin Stoney?
No, I'm sorry. That's awful, isn't it? No, that wasn't my... I said to Luke earlier on, there's one really obvious one, but that wasn't it.
Oh, tell us more.
But now we've said Kevin Stoney, you know who he is in the episode,
no,
right?
I do. No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, now it's really obvious. Now it's really obvious to me. Which is, but no, Mike.
And I'm rubbish at this.
I will admit though, Mark, when I first watched Chimes of Big Ben. They didn't realise it was him for years. So
Right.
I think you're in good company there.
Yeah, no, not hasn't. This is the first moment that I've realised that.
So who did you spot?
My obvious one is Christopher Benjamin.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Who comes again in The Prisoner later on as well.
But dubbed in this episode.
Yeah, is he?
Yes, it's definitely not his voice.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It just sounds really, really odd. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, we had this in when we did the UFO cast. Our favourite character in the UFO cast, I think, Michael, was called Keith Ford.
Always.
And there's an episode of UFO, and the production reason is just that the actor wasn't available for the post dub. And in that episode, he's dubbed by one Robert Rioty, who is the guy who provides the generic
number two
voice. And I think I heard him in this episode dubbing
Peter
Swanick.
Rings a bell.
So when the supervisor is doing what was in your mind, it's not Peter Swanick's voice as it is in the rest of the episode.
Okay.
I think it's Robert Rioty. Somebody can write in and correct me on that. I don't know who dubs Christopher Benjamin, but I was like, oh yeah, it's clearly not Christopher Benjamin's voice.
And it's very odd how little he is in the episode as well.
Yeah.
Really just a little bit at the beginning and the end. I mean...
And that's just sacrilege.
He doesn't even speak at the end.
I know.
But yes, I mean, I suppose the reason you didn't bring him up, Michael, is because we spotted him last episode because he was in Arrival. So he has a much bigger...
Oh, so he's in 3 episodes, isn't he? Yes. So Arrival, Chimes, and Girl Who Was Death.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So, any others? Because there are 3 more, but they're very minor roles.
Hit us with it. Go on, go for it.
Go on, Mark.
I think Finlay Curry is in Doctor Who, but I don't know whether it's just because I think he's bound to have been. But I can't name you an episode. But I have a feeling that he was in it. Am I wrong?
He was not in Doctor Who. No.
Drat.
No. So I will let me quickly run through the 3. So the first is David Arlen, who plays Karol, the Polish dude that they meet who shoots at Rover. He plays a guard warrior in the John Pertwee story The Mutants. Wow. So I think you can be forgiven for not noticing him. And then of the 3 judges for the art competition, the 2 guys both appeared in Doctor Who. I will entirely forgive you for not getting Jack LaWhite as the first judge because he appears in 2 missing episodes of the Daleks' Master Plan. As one of the criminals on Desperate and Knopf's cameraman in The Feast of Stephen.
Fantastic.
And then John Maxim. I don't know if you recognise the name John Maxim as the other judge. He was Frankenstein in The Chase.
Wow.
I'm not going to recognise that.
and then he later appeared as a Cyberman in the Moonbase. So again, I forgive you for not recognising him. So that's our Doctor Who watch for this week. I spotted Kevin Stoney and Christopher Benjamin. If you spotted any of those others, listeners, then you are doing better than me. And all of us.
Unlikely.
Well, it's possible. It's possible. So I think all that remains to say is thank you so much, Mark. A fount of knowledge, as always. I'm used to listening to you talk about the New Testament, but your wealth of prisoner knowledge has been amazing, and really enjoyed talking to you about Big Ben.
It's been such a pleasure. I feel I was saying to Luke offline earlier on that it's sort of and to Michael too. It's sort of fantastic when a podcast starts talking back to you, which is what this feels like to me, and I actually feel a little bit starstruck, and also because I'm much more used. You get to see Luke in like the days of Tumudwup and that, but you don't. At least often don't get to see Michael, so it's quite exciting seeing the lips move while the familiar voice comes out. It's very exciting. I can't, I just want to share with listeners what a exciting experience this is.
God bless you, Chief.
And congratulations on doing such a wonderful project as this Prisoner podcast. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about all the other episodes. It'd be great fun.
Cool. Thank you. And before we go, where can people find you online?
Oh, gosh. Twitter, I'm just Goodacre, Goodacre. That's probably the easiest place. Or I'm at markgoodacre.org.
Cool. And it just remains to well, Michael has been signing off in this way for years, so I will leave the final word to you, Michael.
Be seeing you.
And now for the spoilery bit. So where is the village?
Yeah.
Because in this episode, we are told that it is in Lithuania, 30 miles from the Polish border. And when they do get out, because obviously wherever they are, they do. He obviously is fully conscious of the fact they've sailed 30 miles, and they meet this dude who is supposedly Polish. I can say from my knowledge of Russian that they do sound like Poles speaking Russian when they have their conversation in Russian. There's the whole Estonian thing where she says I'm Estonian and he's like Russian and she's like we don't think so. That is very true. Like the Estonians and the Russians do not like each other from my experience.
Yeah.
So there's all that kind of going on, and then obviously they put him in the crate, and like we said earlier, they could fly him anywhere. And they're getting back to the village. So where is the village? Do we believe it is in Lithuania, and they've just flown him somewhere around the Baltics, and then put him in a ship somewhere, or is it entirely different? Or does it not matter?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in Fallout, he seems to be able to drive through a tunnel and come up. And turn up in the south of England. So, in which case, Many Happy Returns is not right either, is it? I mean, so
yes, yeah.
I mean, I've always tended, because of Many Happy Returns, because he actually definitely does make it back, and he's kind of worked it out on his own. I take that as being the more plausible location, and
right.
this has got it completely wrong.
Right.
Which is, I think, why they take out the this idea that he's worked out where it is with his precise calculations and all the rest of it. Yeah. And also, he kind of gets the location from Nadia,
yes,
doesn't he?
Yeah.
So and she's in cahoots. So I think we have to say, if we want to line this up with Many Happy Returns, then the village is not in Lithuania.
Okay, cool. I
think it's not in Lithuania for a different reason, but yeah, that's fine.
It still doesn't explain Fallout. So, like,
no.
I mean, so my slightly off the wall thing, based solely on the fact that Number 6's house is bigger on the inside than the outside.
Yes.
Is that the whole village might well be a TARDIS and that it can move around. But that is.
I like that.
That was the Tin Dog Podcast. Everything discussed is the intellectual property of others. No infringement is intended. For early access to reviews, follow the show on YouTube or Twitter @TinDogPodcast. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.